Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we have got a really interesting show today. It's on understanding and supporting bereaved children. And I think that bereaved children, I know as a parent who lost their child, that you're so worried about your other kids. I mean, it's pretty amazing. So I'm looking forward to getting some perspective on the show today.
Absolutely, Mom, and our guests all have had personal experience with this. And some of them are still, Elizabeth is still going through this, so we'll introduce our guests in a minute. But before we do that, I don't want to forget to talk about your book.
Thank you.
So you have written a book called Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating. It is out there. All profits go to Open to Hope. And Mom, you wrote it with your fiance, Dr. Frank Powers, who is one of our guests today.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. Hey, Dr. Powers.
So please go and get this phenomenal book. My dad died in 2020, and my mom found hope after, she found love after loss, and it is possible.
And there's a lot of loneliness in the world today. We know the Surgeon General has said this is one of the major problems in the world today, and I will tell you, it's wonderful to be in a relationship. So go to Amazon, hey, and give us a comment on it also.
Yep. So like you said, Mom, we're going to be talking about understanding and supporting bereaved children today. I will introduce our guests and we'll get started. So I think I'll start at the end with your fiance.
Yes.
Dr. Frank Powers, who wrote the book with you. And Dr. Frank is a licensed psychologist who has been in private practice. He was in for over 40 years.
I'm not that old.
You're only 42, Frank. He was the chairman of the Psychiatric Review Board in Arizona and a professor at Scottsdale Community College. His dad died when he was just 15 years old of a heart attack. So Frank has been on other shows with us, and welcome back, Frank.
Thank you. It's a
So
pleasure
he
to be
gives
here.
us some professional as well as personal experience on being a bereaved person.
Exactly. And next to Frank is Maria Georgopoulos. Did I say that correctly?
You did.
Very good. Maria Georgopoulos. So Maria is a licensed mental health counselor. She was a board member with the Men's Grief Network. She is the founder of Rula's Kids, a place for grieving families which provides free grief groups in New York for grieving children and their families. And Maria is active on a lot of committees with the Association of Death Education and Counselors. And as you know, Mom, we partner with them.
Right.
And they are also called ADAC. And you have been on committees with the National Alliance for Children's Grief. Maria's mother died of breast cancer when she was just 20 years old.
So
Welcome,
another
Maria.
person, and you were 14 when she got breast
Was
cancer. So
diagnosed,
another
yes.
person who understands that world.
Yep, and now Maria works with kids, teens, and young adults, so it'll be interesting to hear from her.
Yes.
And then next to her is Elizabeth DeVito Rayburn.
Hey.
Elizabeth has been on our show many times.
And a good friend. Hi, Elizabeth.
You know, usually Elizabeth comes on and talks about sibling loss because she is no stranger to grief and loss. Her brother Ted died when Elizabeth was just 14. Ted was 17.
And if you remember the movie, John Travolta, he was the boy in the bubble.
Yes.
Ted was.
This story was based loosely on his life, and like you said, it was called The Boy in the Bubble. And usually we do shows about that, but today we're going to take a little turn because unfortunately Elizabeth's husband Paul died after battling Parkinson's disease, and he died last April, and Elizabeth is now raising her two teenage sons without a father. So
you've had your own experience, and now you've got your kids,
exactly,
you know, having a loss. Yeah.
outside of her own personal experience, Elizabeth is an author, journalist, and blogger. Her stories have appeared in the Washington Post, Self, Glamour, Psychology Today, and many other publications. She is the author of what I think is one of, by far, the best books out there for sibling loss.
Absolutely.
It's called The Empty Room, Understanding Sibling Loss. And she is also the co-author with her father, Dr. Vincent DeVita, about a book about cancer.
And that was one of the best books I've ever read about cancer, too. It's a terrific book.
And it's called The Death of Cancer. It has more than that, but that's the...
That's a long subhead, yeah.
So welcome again, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right.
so those are our guests, Mom.
Wow, so here we go, understanding and supporting bereaved children. I wanted to ask you to start out, Elizabeth, what is a question you'd ask these two about your boys And they're bereaved. How old are they again?
They are 14, and my oldest just turned 18 on Monday. So
Yeah.
a few days
And,
ago.
and I know Frank was 15 when his dad
Yeah.
died. I wondered if you had a question that you would like to ask him about your 14-year-old.
Wow, the 14-year-old especially, and it's complicated when I try and understand it, even having had my loss, because I don't understand what it means to lose a parent and at these developmental ages, and also because Paul had dementia and was leaving by increments and then
Yes.
finally into a
Yeah.
facility. I don't know when to gauge when the loss even happened developmentally, and how to approach what they've lost, their ability to process it. Like, can they at
Sure,
this
it's
point?
like a moving target.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mine was sudden. My father had a heart attack, and I was out on the baseball diamond at school, and our minister came up, and I thought, wow, what's he doing here? Because you normally don't see your pastor right there on the diamond. And the coach called me over and said, he wants to talk to you. So that's how I found out about my father's death, was the minister came out there. And then I went home, and like my whole world had changed.
Well, Maria, you had more, would be a little bit more like her experience because you were 14 and your mother.
Right. I actually had a lot to say
Yeah.
just now.
Yeah.
Even before you mentioned that, I was thinking I wanted to ask you about the caregiving portion, because I think one of the things that's important for adults and children alike is, did they experience that? Like, what was that like? Because there are many people who confuse what anticipatory grief is, and it's not, you're not really dealing with your grief for the person's death. You're dealing with grief for the person changing from the person you knew them to be. And so when I have teenagers or even children that I know that there was a big caregiving piece there, or that there was watching a decline, you know, or changes in their father, I would address those. Like, what were the things that you lost even before your father died?
Yeah.
And then you're
Yeah.
also dealing with what's happened now since the death.
Yeah.
So I think that's a whole lot for a teenager to take in. But those are some of the things that come to mind for me, because I think that decline in health is something that often gets missed. Like, how do we deal with that? And those losses need to be dealt with also.
That makes a lot of sense.
You know, Heidi, Compassionate Friends, when we go there, you know, that's for people who've had siblings die, go there. And one of the things that I've noticed is it's really hard to get boys engaged, particularly in these ages, 14 and 15, in dealing with the loss. Getting them into groups and getting your support for them. I know, Elizabeth, you had trouble finding anybody who would see your son because it was before your husband passed. But, you know, how do you get them into groups now?
How do you get them to go, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Well,
Yeah.
and my kids are confused because what you're alluding to is when my kids were going through this anticipatory phase, I knew that they had a loss, and I was trying to find a support group for them, and none of the loss groups for teenagers would accept them because they hadn't experienced a literal death. So it was literally like society was like, nothing happened to you. So, you know, they didn't understand that. Now they're confused because they think that they should be over it or done with it, because, you know, society told them they didn't have a loss and they should have dealt with it already because it happened a long time ago in a way. So now I don't think they feel like they belong in a bereavement group
I
in a
don't.
way.
I wonder if that's all of it, though, because maybe they don't want to do
Oh,
it.
I doubt it's all of it. Yeah.
I was thinking of you, Frank, because I know you didn't go into a bereavement group, right? Or even think about.
Did you talk about it, Mike?
Well, it
With
was
anybody or
really
no?
interesting because my uncles on my mother's side wanted me to immediately become back to myself. I mean, their expectation was that, well, it's over now, so we've had the funeral, so, when are you going back to school? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? And it's a loss, but isn't it over now?
Wow.
And that was really tough. And fortunately for me, and it was interesting, it came out of left field in that I had a job at 14 and I was working at the YMCA and I was sort of teaching swimming and that kind of thing because that's the kind of thing I was interested in. And the YMCA secretary who was there knew about my father, and he was the one who really, in a sense, started the counseling.
Oh, that's great.
So he was there for me.
Yeah, I like it.
But none of my relatives and that were very helpful. It was really someone from the outside.
There were probably no groups in your age in that day either,
oh,
right?
gosh, no, not in Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah, I was wondering, Maria, for you, did you talk about it? I mean, here you are, teenagers. It's hard for teenagers to. It's such an unusual experience to lose a parent when you're a teenager.
Yeah, I was the only one.
Well, that's what I would
and
think.
I was a
And
celebrity in a strange sort of way.
That's interesting.
And so I didn't like the celebrity at first. I thought, oh my God, I don't want to be singled out, you know, as being different.
Yeah.
And yet I was, because everyone else, their parents were still alive, and my father was one of the first to leave of his cohort, so it was really different. And so being a celebrity was actually a burden.
Yeah, that would be a weird thing to be a celebrity about, right?
Yeah. It wasn't a thing I looked forward to. And all my instructors in high school knew, and they were all kind of being very nice to me, but almost solicitous, and I was feeling really uncomfortable with that. I just wanted things to be kind of like normal. I didn't want to be pointed out, and I didn't want to be, special in that way, because that was not something nice to be special of.
Yeah. What about you, Maria? Did you feel like you could talk to anybody, friends, anybody? Was there anybody there, family?
Not really, because in our family, everybody was grieving differently. But also, I want to say, even at that age, at 14, when I was a teenager, I think there's so much going on developmentally that you already don't feel good about yourself. And so you're trying to figure that out, your self-esteem issues,
You don't want to stand out, do you?
Yeah, you don't want to stand out. And also, it's hard to know what you need help with. You might be focusing on the latest crush you have, too, right? It doesn't mean that you're not also grieving, but there's so much happening at the same time that it's hard to know what to do. But when my mother died, I was in college. So I kind of just, actually, 2 weeks after she died, I went to college.
Yeah.
And pretended
That's
everything
one of
was
the problems,
okay.
because nobody knows you there when your brother died.
Yeah. They don't know you, so you don't have, and like you're all saying, you don't want to be different. You don't want to be known as different for a death.
Yeah.
So you want to fit in with
and
your
my mother was in such grieving that I really felt like an orphan because I lost my mother as well as my father, because she was not available. I mean, she was in her own grief, and like you said, she was dealing with it on her own, and she felt a lot of guilt around my father's death. So basically, I felt like an orphan, and I was looking for finding a family. And it was interesting, because then I latched on to a girlfriend, and I latched on to her family.
Oh, wow.
And that was how I got support.
That makes
her
sense.
family was absolutely wonderful, and they and the YMCA secretary together were my support group.
And they weren't a grieving family. Elizabeth,
Yeah.
it's interesting as siblings, because
Yeah,
you're
I heard it.
aren't you going, wait a minute?
Yep.
I can identify with these guys losing a parent because there's similarities, right, with sibling loss?
It's what we hear a lot with siblings. Is my parents went away after my sibling died and never really came back. So you do feel like you lost the sibling and the parents.
Did
to
you
the
feel
grief.
like that as a 14-year-old that had lost your brother?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think my parents ever really came back from that. And it's interesting having had this experience as a parent now with an illness in the family, parenting kids, to realize I have a lot of empathy for what they were coping with and trying to do and why they couldn't, do things. I think for a long time I was angry, and then I understood,
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Heidi and I have talked about this. I have said to her, I'm sorry that I wasn't a good parent. I really wasn't. After Scott died, you're just trying to get through. You're trying to survive. You're trying to live. You're not sure you're going to survive.
Yeah, I think you have to find the support outside your family because most of them are, like you said, are grieving and they've got their own things. So where I found support was outside my family, and I was lucky enough to find it. But I do think most kids know they need something, and so they're looking for it.
Well, it's interesting because my
Wherever
mother would
it is.
say I wasn't a good parent because I was trying to survive, but I knew that. So because, I saw my mom change and I saw my parents destroyed, and so they weren't in Hawaii getting suntans. they were grieving. So I mean, I think I cut them some slack because I was like, they were suffering.
And also, I want to say in my family, me and my sister is 5.5 years older, and there's no manual for how to grieve, and also nobody talks about death. So that made it even harder. We both didn't really want to talk to each other about it. So I think it's a good idea to go outside. And the thing that was actually most helpful to me was I remember reading, because I couldn't find any support groups, I remember reading Hope Edelman's book, Motherless Daughters.
We've had Hope on the show a couple of times.
Yeah.
She's great.
And that was really good because I said at least there are other people that understand, even though I don't know where they are. There were no support groups around for that. So that was really helpful to me.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Elizabeth, when you're listening to that, you have a 14-year-old. I'm wondering how you feel about him connecting with other people outside the family, and what comes up for you when these guys are saying, Frank's saying the YMCA helped him, another family. You're saying you've got to have. How is that for you?
I'm literally spinning my wheels thinking, who could that be in our circle? Who do I know? And it's interesting, my 18-year-old has a very serious girlfriend, and struggling with sort of disentangling him a bit so that he can go to college. But I also am hearing how much he probably needs that presence right now.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. That was a saving grace.
Yeah.
Her family took me in.
Yeah. Well, she's more with us, but she was there during the whole final illness when we came home to tell the kids that he had passed.
Yeah,
She
no,
was
that's
there.
a big.
She went to the funeral.
Yeah.
She's,
I would see her as a real ally
Yeah.
for him.
Yeah, and then my younger son has a lot of anxiety issues, so was like, didn't go to school for a while, and we're just sort of bringing him back, and it was during the pandemic, so everyone was cut off.
Yeah.
So we're just sort of bringing him back into his world. So there's not an obvious person there beyond a therapist, but I'll have to think about.
My daughter was 14 when Scott died, and honestly, she tells me now, just recently, it's taken years for her to deal with this.
Yeah.
Years, and she really didn't want to deal with it, and she hasn't, and it's been fine. She's come around in the past, how long, Heidi? 10 years?
Yeah.
When she's 30. I mean, she even started to deal with it as a 14-year-old. But now I was talking to her. She was telling me some of the stuff she did while I didn't even know.
Wow.
She went boating with her friend all the time.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
She drove her friend's dad had a sports car, and he used to let her take it to go get gas when she was underage and didn't have a license.
Wow,
She's
that's
telling
scary.
me all these things, acts of kindness that random people did that I didn't know about. But one of the problems is with the pandemic, your son has not had the opportunity to have
Oh yeah, you're
these
cut off
random,
from those supports.
weird
Connections.
Yeah.
experiences
Yeah.
where people just show up.
Yeah. Right.
He's probably not. I know you have a country place. He wasn't there during just
We
running.
didn't have the place at that point.
Yeah, he wasn't out running wild during the, after, or meeting people at the grocery store that knew, or some random neighbor
Right.
who does an act of kindness that you don't even know about.
Yeah, we
So-
lost our community during COVID.
Yeah.
Both my kids were transitioning. He was transitioning from elementary school to middle school when COVID hit, and my older son from middle school to high school. And everybody shut down. I mean, half of the people we knew, so we didn't have the elementary school, which had been a big community, and then we weren't out, and then people started leaving the city and
not
moving.
coming back.
And not coming back, and that is still happening.
Yep.
Like one of my last
Yep.
friends here just
It
moved
is.
a couple weeks ago.
But I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
you make a good point, though, about I think people panic too, and it's like, but this is not a sprint. It's kind of
that's
like
true.
a really long marathon.
Yeah.
And the truth is, meeting kids where they are is very helpful too, because they may not be ready for some formalized support. They may be ready for some more informal things until they're ready for something more.
Yeah.
So sometimes it just takes a little bit to get to be
What
ready.
year were you doing your dissertation and we went to Compassionate Friends?
In 2001.
Okay, so 2001, my daughter, who was 14 at the time, Scott died, goes to a Compassionate Friends meeting with
And
us.
now she's in adults.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's an adult. She goes to the meeting. We sit down. They have a candle lighting, and a dinner, and we look around and she's gone. And I'm like, wow. I wonder, where she went. She calls and says, or I think it was before cell phones, wasn't it? Did she call? Or
It was in 2001.
Anyway, somehow we found out that she left because she couldn't handle all these bereaving parents. I mean, this is, and siblings, and now she actually works with us and
Yeah.
goes to all the events.
It was too much.
But this is how many years later?
Yeah,
That
it was too much. It was like 20 years later.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying, sometimes kids aren't ready.
Right.
Don't you do groups also?
I do. I've done groups for the last 18 years or so in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Manhattan initially. And the kids are normally separated by age because developmentally it's helpful that way. So now I'm doing groups in the Hudson Valley in Kingston, New York. And there's a littles group that's for the 6 to 9-year-olds that have had a death in the family. Then there's a tween group for the 10 to 12-year-olds and a teen group. And then alongside one of the groups is a caregiver group so that caregivers can also have
Wow, that's
their
nice.
space.
Because that's such an
Yeah.
anxiety. The anxiety, I think, as a caregiver is one of the things that I think my being anxious, I think, was one of the things that was most difficult because you see your kids, they can't be anxious when you're anxious.
Well,
You
and
know.
it's hard to separate out what is normal developmental teenage angst and kid angst and what is because of the death,
Right.
right?
And then pandemic in the middle of it.
And then
Yes.
pandemic.
Yeah.
It's the perfect storm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
One thing I always say to people is, if you're not sure if your teenager is doing all right, ask somebody who knows them, who lives in your neighborhood, who has kids. Say, what do you think? You've got an eye on somebody you admire, the way they're bringing
Yeah.
up their kids. Ask them, get an opinion from them. Because I think sometimes we can get overly anxious. We wrote a book on teen grief.
Yeah.
We were writing it for teenagers, but our publishers said teenagers don't read, so we wrote it for adults. And our publisher said, write it for adults and tell them to leave it in the bathroom. So it's called Teen Grief, really.
Yeah.
And you can get it on Amazon.
Yeah.
So we get some
I'm
good
wondering,
reports.
Mom, if to get some advice here as we're wrapping up from
Yeah.
everybody.
I think it's a good idea.
So Frank, if it's for the parents out there that are watching this that have grieving kids, teens and young adults, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would certainly say from my experience and from clients that I've had is that you do not want to see your child getting support from other people as some kind of threat. You want to see it as, hey, this is great, because they probably can't get it from me. They probably can't get it from the other relatives. And if they're getting it from someone, you want to see that as a positive, not as a threat that somehow your child is moving away from you. You want to see it as, hey, they're moving toward support.
I like that. And Maria?
Sure. What I would say, especially because I'm in an area now that has very little services for kids, even in Manhattan, it's been dwindling since the pandemic. I would say pick up the phone and call some of your local resources, even if it's a hospice, even if it's some private grief organization. even if there are no groups around, most professionals will help you with some resources. I talk to people all the time that just call me and say, I just need to know how to start this conversation with my kids or with my teens, even if they're not ready for support. And most people will help you in that realm or direct you to like the Dougie Center that has a lot of resources that you can look into. So I'd say just start somewhere and get the conversation going.
Is there any advice about getting the conversation going?
I have a ton of it.
Okay.
Well, but
Maybe
I
some
think,
of it is on your site too, right? Because you've got a
Yes.
robust website.
Yes. I think just remember that it's okay. Actually, one of the things that I want to say about that is it's good for kids to see that you have your grief, but then you also get up and you take care of your life and take care of them as well. So starting the conversation by saying, you know what, I feel sad today, or I feel really angry that this is happening. You know, just simply where you are and engaging your child in that way will open the door so that they feel safe and comfortable to have that conversation with you. Because again, there's no manual, but even just starting simply with, you know, this is terrible. This kind of sucks for us as a family, you know. Just even simple language like that
I
for
like
the
that.
kids.
That normalizes it.
Yeah.
And you're
Okay.
all in it together.
Elizabeth,
yeah.
with your, how old were you when your brother died?
14.
Okay, what is, with your own voice at 14, what would you advise yourself?
Find my people.
Okay.
I didn't have anyone. I didn't know that I was part of a group. You know, I didn't know there were others who had the experience. I was very isolated. So what Frank said about having those people outside resonates.
Find your people. I love
Yeah.
it. Well,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is the most successful thing, and you need to trust your kids that they'll go to safe people.
Yeah, I love that.
I like that,
we'll go to
Frank.
safety. There are some angels
I like
out there.
that Frank is still emotional about this. And this is bringing up a lot because it's interesting. It's almost like you go back into that space
Yeah.
and you feel it very intensely. I mean, being young and losing people, it's not for the faint of
Yeah,
heart.
I
It's
didn't
a big
even know
deal.
what I needed.
Yeah,
This is good. This is good for people out there. Kids don't know what they need.
absolutely.
You know?
Give us a quick rundown on your website and what you
Where to
want us
find
to know. Where to find you.
Maybe we should end with
I'll
Frank.
tell you where Frank is. Frank, you'll find Frank and I at the goldendatingdoctors.com.
We're there.
We're there. Okay. And Maria?
Rulaskids.org.
Look at that.
I don't really have anything right now. Find me on Facebook.
Find you on
I've got
Facebook, Elizabeth DeVita Rayburn. Also your book.
yeah, you can find my books on Amazon. It's The Empty Room and The Death of Cancer.
If
The
you
two
Google
books.
Elizabeth, you will find her over and over and over.
I have a blog. I haven't been
Even
working on lately.
Wikipedia, she's
but-
there.
Heidi and I want to thank everybody for watching us on this show today. And we always want to remind you, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.